Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, and welcome to episode 5 of our Star Wars month. I'm Chris Garner, joined by my co-hosts Tayte and George Aldridge, as we review and discuss everything involving our favourite galaxy far, far away. We're 4 days away from the release of The Force Awakens as of this recording, and we're celebrating the release of a brand new Star Wars movie by devoting the entire month of December to the Star Wars saga. On our last episode, we kicked off with the original trilogy with our Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope review, and on today's show we'll be taking on what many consider to be the best Star Wars film to date, which is Star Wars Episode 5 The Empire Strikes Back, written by Lee Brackett and Lawrence Kasdan, and directed by Irving Kershner. So we usually kick off these things with like the first time we saw it, and I don't know about you, George, and Tate, I know you saw the original trilogy first, but for me, this again, sadly, is sort of a blur. Like the original Star Wars film, I just remember sort of seeing it after Phantom Menace. I had them all on the, I think it was the 1997 special edition videos, and it was just sort of a logical progression from one to the next. There was no sort of long 3-year wait between movies and being wowed by it. So I don't know if you guys' experience was different with first seeing this film.
With this one again, I don't really remember it. I mean, I was given the videos and I just saw them on repeat. I can't remember the first time I saw it, which is a shame. This is the film I know least of the special edition changes. I never even clocked on until I was older that they changed Boba Fett's voice. There's so much that I kind of forgot. So I think this might have been the one I watched least on video, maybe. I'll be talking there about how my opinion changed from a young age, but I just really can't remember it from being a kid. This is more of the adult one I remember liking more as I've grown up.
Completely the same. I mean, I remember this one being a very dark one. I remember it because of the giant spoiler, which I think the entire world knows. But other than that, this one was like, oh, it's the dark one. It's the one that I would rather not watch. But then as I've grown, I've been like, yeah, sure, I like this film. And then it's slowly become my favourite Star Wars
definitely, film. But also, as well as that, because it is my favourite now, it wasn't growing up. It was always Return of the Jedi. My uncle gave me his AT-AT, and it's still in my garage, and it's still one of my greatest toys I've ever had in my life because it is incredible. I won't ever give it up. It is an amazing model, and I just remember the Battle of Hoth clear as cut from a young age. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, a quick round the board. Is it AT-AT or AT-AT?
AT-AT.
AT-AT.
Yeah, I'm in the AT-AT one as well.
AT-AT.
Just purely for the fact that the vehicles...
Just because it isn't R2... It's R2-D2, it's C-3PO, it isn't...
Yeah. But it is the AT-AT, to me. And I love the fact there's like a debate amongst it all. But it's odd because I'm an AT-AT, but I'm an AT-ST. It's just, I don't know why it's always been the AT-AT to me. Although
I think it was on an old advert, wasn't it? Like the narrator guy called it an AT-AT, and it just sort of stuck for that generation, and then like people grew up around it as well.
Yeah, and it's whatever my family called it. I mean, you know, I was given an AT-AT, and that's what it kind of stayed as. But yeah, it's odd because all the other ones are pronounced like that.
Now with this movie, like I've got the despecialized editions on a DVD, which are the closest to the best quality versions you can get of the unaltered original versions of the movies, and I can only imagine being in the cinema seeing this for the first time when that opening crawl goes up and you see Episode 5. Now 3 years after you've just come right off the first one, which is obviously was just called Star Wars before it was later retitled Episode 4 A New Hope. So I could imagine audiences being like, what? Did we miss like a whole chunk of them somewhere? So it was really weird that he chose to put, you know, just smacking Episode 5 on the top. But if you are just looking at this as a trilogy, this is sort of the archetypal middle point in a trilogy. And often you get a lot of people that refer to this one that this is the Empire Strikes Back of whatever trilogy they're referring to. It does exactly everything it needs to. The first act with the first movie just introduce you to all the characters and the situation. This takes them all to their most extreme points, to their darkest points. You get a lot of reflection with Luke learning the ways of the Force, and then it really gets dark later on in the film with Han and what happens to him, and then the confrontation between Vader and Luke. And I think just as a story, if you're looking at them as a 3-act part, this is without doubt the strongest film out of all of them. I still think that Return of the Jedi is my favourite one of the original trilogy. I think that with Jedi, it's sort of, you don't have to have knowledge of the previous ones. It's sort of a very self-contained film. Again, you can just sort of like put it in, watch it. It's got a beginning, it's got an end. Whereas this one, fantastic film, but it does sort of end on a to be continued ending, where you have to just sort of like go straight into it and put Return of the Jedi in.
Yeah, and
Well, it's a middle episode. I mean, when you're trying to leave, you have to leave stuff on a cliffhanger if you know the next one's going to be finale. I mean, all films do it. So I wasn't really too bothered by that. In fact, I liked it as an effect on the film. Just also the fact that I know that like people had to wait for the final film and stuff like that. That's another drawing sales.
3 years. 3 years people had to wait to find out what happened to Han Solo.
Hey, it was the old days.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that people assumed he was dead. So.
Nowadays we'd have had at least 2 spin-offs in between that movie.
And maybe like a leak of him on set saying he's alive.
Oh, that makes me sad thinking about that. That was the glorious thing. I mean, we didn't really get a lot of set leaks on the new film, but again, there wouldn't have been 24 TV spots.
Yeah.
There would have been Star Wars. You know you're going to see this. Kids saw it at the age of like 4 or 5. It's brilliant, but going to the ending quickly, I want to say that final shot is one of the best shots ever in these Star Wars films. With the sort of galaxy in view, and Luke got his arm around his yet-to-be-announced sister, which is creepy. And it's a brand new hand as well. There's so much that's right of the ending, but fair play to the writers and Lucas. I never knew whose idea it was to go dark. I reckon it could have been Lawrence Kasdan, equally to Lucas, but pulling it off was brilliant. And character-wise, this is certainly the best in terms of character development, I think.
Definitely, and I also think it's the best one in terms of direction as well. I mean, Irving Kershner, I'm trying to think of some other projects he directed. I know he directed RoboCop 2, but this film, you can definitely see a huge change in directorial style. And I think it really works in the film, like just from the opening few shots and the bit with the hangar and stuff, it's got a different pace to it. It moves at a much more conventional pace that we see in movies nowadays, whereas the first one was very much, and I mentioned this in the previous review, just sort of scene, cut to the next one, cut to the next one. That's not a bad thing. I love the original Star Wars, but to me, this and Jedi definitely feel like more complete films in terms of their direction, their writing. I don't know how much of a say George Lucas had in this, because I know that he was fired off after he finished the first one. They didn't want him back because his film went way over budget. Maybe he was having a lot of arguments with the studio, because we know how he likes to have control.
The amount of money
he said in an interview in '99 that if even Kershner didn't do it, it would have been very similar still. I reckon he had a lot of control in the story. I just think when it got dark and badly dark, that's when you had the Kershner / Kasdan / Brackett effect. But I still think he had a massive say in everything that happened. Anything that happened to a character would have been glossed over with him first. So I think he had a massive hand to play in it. But again, it's just the directing bit. It is different, and in all honesty, it does favour it slightly. But it's a different type of film to Episode 4. I think the difference now is that when they were making this, I mean, Lucas paid for it himself. He only had to go to Fox at the end to get a bit more money. So he almost self-funded this, make everything he did of Episode 4. I think it was like 15 mil, and it still went over budget to about 20. But he had a massive part to play, I think.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it does work as a continuation from the first one, so we can sort of get more into it now. So the plot, what I like about this is that it does split our characters up, and they all go in their separate ways and have their own dramas and sort of character things to deal with. And in this one, Luke sort of starts to really come to the forefront. In the first one, he was very much a sort of whiny farm boy, and rewatching that movie again, he is sort of whiny all the way through it. But this one, where he's on Hoth, and then he's using the lightsaber on the AT-AT to throw the grenade into it, and then we'll talk about this later, but the bit where he's training with Yoda is some of the best stuff in this movie. And sort of seeing the hints of that darkness that could happen to him when he goes into that cave with the vision. It's really awesome stuff to watch, and then that ultimately culminates in Return of the Jedi, which we'll talk a lot more about in that review. But what I love about this movie is where it takes the characters. Each of them have a big slight thing to do in this film, big say, and it's just awesome to watch it all play out.
No, I completely agree as well. I mean, we've said this all about almost every film, the universe that it created. And this film is still building ground. I mean, I know that in Return of the Jedi there's less building ground and more of finishing off the story, but in this one, this is a setup for the finale. However, they did it so well that it's actually better than the finale.
Yeah.
So, just a credit to how well it was just done and how well it was handled. I mean, I don't know many other films that have been able to pull off a feat that, this film has done. being the second in the franchise at the time. So all I could think of on the same scale would probably be The Godfather Part 2. Like, in the scale of how well they went about things. So
yeah, and those two films are
up
often put together as the best sequels of all time, aren't they? It's sort of like T2, Empire Strikes Back, Godfather Part 2.
Dark Knight. Sorry,
Dark Knight,
just added in. But yeah, it's true. And again, I think when you've got a sequel that's so good, especially in comparison to an already outstanding original, that third and final film is so hard to pull off. And I think I'm going to speak about a lot more in Return of the Jedi, but again, it comes down to what Tayte was saying, that it sets up so well. It is better than, and I personally, I think I'm a minority. I prefer the Two Towers to Return the King, and Lord of the Rings can be argued as the greatest trilogy of all time. My personal preference is Star Wars, but it's all about the build-up to the climax of a trilogy, and this does it in a way that was probably unexpected. I don't think a lot of people thought that Star Wars would be dark, especially after seeing that first one, but it does it. It pulls it off. It works, because if it didn't work, if people didn't like it, if they reacted badly to it, they would have been in a bit of a situation with Return of the Jedi. Although it is a lot lighter in sense, they would have changed a lot of things about it.
I'm just sort of reading here now on Wikipedia. Apparently, when it was initially released, it received mixed reviews from critics. That absolutely baffles me. As well, since then it's obviously gone on to receive critical acclaim. People are putting it up in the greatest films of all time list. Definitely deserves to be on there. But mixed reviews initially, that's really strange. Now, it's definitely not a standalone piece like the first one. As we said, like, George Lucas sort of made that one as a standalone fun space adventure, but I think this one definitely does continue it in a decent way. So let's get on to some of the new characters that are brought into this. We'll get on to the main ones and sort of their journeys when we go into our favourite moments and sort of the themes of the movie. But we sort of have 3 big new characters introduced into this one, so we'll kick off with Yoda. So this was the first time we saw him, obviously voiced and puppeteered by the great Frank Oz. Now when you see him in this movie, rewatching it again, and he's sort of like cracking jokes, you're watching it and I'm thinking like, oh god, this is going to be the Jar Jar of this movie. Like, who is this weird little green puppet thing that's just appeared out of nowhere? Yeah. It's got a walking stick and it's like clanging it off R2-D2. I'm like, what is going on? But then as the film goes on, and that's sort of a front that Yoda puts on, and you really see how wise he is, and he's training Luke up, that is without a question of a doubt some of the best stuff in the entire Star Wars saga, those scenes. And one of my favourite scenes is the bit where he lifts the X-Wing out of the swamp, and just Yoda himself. His dialogue is so quotable in this movie, and I'm sure everyone's quoted like "do or do not, there is no try" at some point, and things like that.
Here's the old wise man of quotes. Like, if you hear most quotes nowadays, it is just Yoda quotes taken into context. It's hilarious to see in public, but I love it.
And this is the Yoda I prefer to see as well, just sort of the wise one whose greatest ally is the Force. In this movie, the technology hadn't caught up to see him like flipping around with a lightsaber, but I don't think it's really needed for his character. My mate Sal, who I did the reaction to for the trailer 3, me and him have argued about this loads. He loves the fact that Yoda has a lightsaber in the prequels. He says that because he's the leader of the Jedi, he needs one. We need to see how awesome he is at wielding one, but I've always been in the camp where you just need to see Yoda be an awesome Force user, and that's it. He's sort of above the level of just lightsaber.
Yeah. I like the fact he has a lightsaber. I'm not massively keen on the fights themselves, but what I like more about the Episode 2 fight is, I know it's the wrong film, but is how he absorbs the Force lightning, and you can see his power in that film. Granted, due to technology and stuff, it looks a lot cooler when there's a puppet pulling an X-Wing out than it does a CGI puppet pulling an X-Wing out, if anything ever happens and they compared them. But I always see him as the grand old man, but I prefer that how he doesn't have his lightsaber in the originals. But again, it makes sense for him to have it in the prequels. It's kind of a necessity considering everyone else has one. But the way he's handled is brilliant, and it's credit to Frank Oz. And also to Mark Hamill. I mean, there was reports that on set he was struggling. You know, I think he said something like being alone with a puppet for 6 weeks on one set was almost like impossible. And you know, can you imagine that, where you've got Carrie Fisher and Han Solo just chilling together with everyone else, then there's just Luke and a puppet, and you have to act with a puppet. It must have been so hard. And I think the performance of Yoda does also come down to the performance of Mark Hamill, which are both fantastic. But I love the dynamic that they take Luke away, they send him to the isolated planet to train, because it would have been so easy for them to fall into a trap of having him train with everyone around him and stuff like that. But it was so cool to go just to the isolated Dagobah system, sorry, Dagobah itself, and I think it works wonders. But Yoda's introduction, every time I see it, I love it, where he's just hitting R2-D2, stealing his food. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and this is a really small little nitpick I have this with this movie, but Star Wars is obviously a fictional universe. It's a grand one with all different manners of creatures and aliens. It's always sort of bothered me that you see sort of like conventional Earth-based snakes and lizards in that cave. It does sort of take me out of it a bit. Like, everything's so new and alien-like, and then you just see things from our world. It does sort of like take you out of it a little bit. That's a really, really minor point I have with that. But two other characters. So shall we start with the smoothest guy in the galaxy, or the greatest bounty hunter of all time?
What about the guy who controls the show?
Oh, very well said.
Okay.
He's talking about the Emperor.
Yeah.
I will say this before we get into Special Edition Tobacco. Tate, I know you said you haven't seen the specials, but have you seen the Blu-rays or the DVDs?
Yep.
The fact that Lucas went back during Episode 3 filming and had Ian McDiarmid redo that scene as the Emperor is the best thing they ever did. Again, I said I can't remember the videos too much. I can't remember the old Emperor until I googled it on the internet to check Empire Strikes Back before change, and I think it works so well to have it replacing, because as continuity goes, it's only one scene, but bringing up Anakin Skywalker's name in that single scene, having the Emperor himself so you know what's going to happen in the next film, I think is awesome. And if you want to see a modern trend, it's the fact that Avengers are blatantly trying to steal this by slowly teasing Thanos each film. But could you imagine being there in 1980? We all grew up knowing who the Emperor was, but you'd have heard about the Emperor in Episode 4. You would have seen a film titled The Empire Strikes Back. You're going to be sitting there thinking, who is the Emperor? Then you would have got this one scene where they show him as a blue hologram, and it's such a brilliant moment. But I love the fact they changed the scene, and it's great to kind of see Darth Vader not in that man of power. You see him bowing down to someone else. It's great.
And Clive Revill did the voice of the original Emperor in the theatrical version, and it was the actual image of the Emperor was portrayed by his wife, apparently, according to this, Elaine Baker. Oh, hang on, no, sorry. Elaine Baker, the wife of makeup designer Rick Baker, and I think she was in chimpanzee makeup, I think I read, for the initial image. It definitely does make a lot more sort of story sense to go back and change it to Ian McDiarmid. The thing I have a problem with is that I wish they'd have used his sort of appearance from Return of the Jedi Emperor. It's very much the one from Revenge of the Sith, where he's sort of right there with his monster face. There's no sort of mystery to him with the Ian McDiarmid image, because he's right there front and centre, whereas the Clive Revill one, he's still very much in shadow and you only see a bit of his face and he's really creepy. I think if they just sort of darkened the image a little bit so we don't really get a full reveal of him until Return of the Jedi, it would have been a lot better. But most of the changes in Empire in the special editions are more for continuity between the prequels and the original trilogy. So while we're on the subject, we may as well get into a few of the other changes, I guess. The biggest one alongside that is probably redubbing the voice of Boba Fett to is it Tamora Morrison, who did the voice of who played Django? So they give him like one of the clones' voice. The original actor who played him was Jeremy Bulloch, and I think that Bulloch, he acts the lines, whereas Morrison just sort of reads them. I think that Bulloch brought a lot more to the character in terms of that personality that everyone loved with Boba Fett. They only give him the clone voice to bridge that gap between sort of to Attack of the Clones and this one. It makes more sense if you watch sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but if you're watching them as a standalone trilogy, I think it's a real shame that sort of Bullock's credits now been completely wiped off Boba Fett, which is a real shame.
I'd have to say that it doesn't, because Jeremy Bulloch never originally voiced him. Bullock's the man in the suit. They had just an actor that did the voice similar to how James Earl Jones did the voice on that, which was always...
Oh, here we are. Jason Wingreen
yes,
did the voice of him.
But I was saying earlier that I can't remember the switch from on Empire from Video. So I can't really remember the old Boba Fett voice. I've always remembered the Kiwi one, which I love because I love the Kiwi accents, and it's awesome on Boba Fett and Jango Fett. But going into Boba, it's such a cool introduction to it because you kind of just see him. I can't remember the first time I saw it. As I grew older, I clocked on that a lot of people love this guy, and I always remembered him as a kid as the idiot that flew into the Sarlacc pit, which is still brilliant, but that's for another discussion. But I love the establishing bounty hunter shot where they're all there, but this is the main guy when Darth Vader says to him like, no incinerating this time, and he looks so great. I mean, his armor is just quality.
Yeah, definitely one of the most iconic images of Star Wars, that character, without question.
Yeah, and the best thing about it was I believe Boba Fett actually debuted in like 1978 or something, or 77. I think George Lucas was having a parade and there was a Boba Fett there. It might have been the white prototype one, but he'd obviously planned this character for a few years before, which is credit for putting him into the film.
I think the first time actually that Boba Fett ever debuted was in an animated short in the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special. There's like a short little animated segment in that film where Boba Fett's riding like a big gigantic purple long necked dinosaur, and I think that was the first time people ever saw him. I can't remember what year Star Wars Holiday Special came out. I'll just check that up, but yeah, that was the first ever appearance of Boba Fett. That came out 78, so 1 year after the original Star Wars we got our first glimpse of Boba Fett. And wasn't the original suit intended to sort of be based off the Stormtrooper one? Like, it was going to all be white?
Yeah.
That prototype one? Yeah. I'm glad they changed it because the one we got is just fantastic and just so akin to the Star Wars saga. Other special edition changes really quickly. We see a lot more of Cloud City. There's sort of a lot more CGI aerial shots, and around the city we see a lot more civilians, things like that. And the biggest one that I like, there's one change in each of the special editions that I love more than the theatricals. And in this one, it's the Wampa, the snow creature at the start. In the theatrical version, you really don't see it. You see it briefly when it knocks Luke off the Tauntaun at the very beginning. But that's really all you see of it. It's very much kept in shadows. You'll get like a brief glimpse of its arms sort of walking towards Luke. In the special edition, you see it in just all its glory. It's just right there, front and centre. And thankfully, they used a guy in a costume. And honestly, I think the Wampa's one of the coolest looking things in Star Wars. So it's great to see it. It's like sort of like eating the Tauntaun. It's stalking towards Luke. And I think that definitely adds a lot more sort of suspense to that one scene. We see it recoiling and like screaming once its arm's been cut off. It's a really small change, but I like that we actually get to see the Wampa.
Yeah, and again, I didn't really clock on until a few years ago that the Wampa was never in the original edition, and I'm guessing it's not really an Easter egg, but I'm guessing Lucas went for the sort of Jaws effect of not showing the monster that does it. But as a sort of 8-year-old kid seeing it, I actually thought it was pretty terrifying when it's dripping with blood and it's got horns at the side of its head. Although it looks a bit like a Yeti, it's an awesome design, and its cave as well when he's just chomping on that Tauntaun. Yeah. I think it's great. It's a great sort of reaction. It's a change that makes a lot of sense as well.
I mean, when I was watching the theatrical editions, sort of getting in the mood for Force Awakens, and maybe it's because I'm used to seeing the special editions. I did grow up with the '97 special editions, and then after that the 2004 DVD ones in the silver box set. Maybe it's because I've just been so used to always seeing the Wampa, but when you watch the theatrical version again, it almost feels like you're watching a fan edit. Like, you're expecting to see the Wampa there, and it's not there, and that was always a problem with me. So that's Boba Fett. Let's talk about Lando really briefly, and then we'll sort of get into some of our favourite scenes. Easily the smoothest guy in the galaxy, just Billy D. Williams is the man, and his introduction into this. I mean, he's introduced really late into the film as well, probably like 3/4 of the way in, and just right from his entrance, it's fantastic. We get sort of hints that Han and Lando were best friends. They fell out over some. What was it? Was it because he lost the Falcon to him, or he did something in the past? But he goes there because they need to take refuge there, and it's just amazing that, hello, what have we here? It's just, I love that line, and Billy D plays it brilliantly.
Yeah, Lando is an absolute brilliant character in the sense that you have to introduce new people in the sequels, but you don't overdo it. Yoda is great; he works as the wise man, replacing Obi-Wan. And Lando's just a good new character because it's some depth. And the way I've always seen it was that for them 3 years, do you know if he's a good guy or if he's a bad guy? We knew because we used for Episode 6. But I'm guessing when he betrayed them, there'd have been a lot of people that would have reacted, and you'd be questioning him for the entirety of that 3-year wait for Episode 6. So I think it was a cool dynamic to have him betray them, although he doesn't really have much of a choice, and he half redeems himself, but is still there with Chewie strangling him. But I love him. He's a brilliant character, I think.
Yeah, I personally would have said that I would have preferred that scene if we'd got to know him more, then he betrayed them. Maybe if he was in the first film, or if it was Han who betrayed them, or someone like that. Because we get introduced to this character, and he almost, they, like, on screen you meant to say, oh yeah, he's our friend, we can trust him. Yet as a viewer, you can't really trust, you're told that you can trust him, however you've only just been introduced to him. Then they go and betray him, and you're like, no, we can't trust him. Like, why did we even trust him in the first place? We've only just got to know him. So, and I reckon betrayal should only come when a character is fully fleshed out.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. So, I think they do, for the time he is on screen though, I think they do the best job they can because they hint at his past. And I know the whole thing, the prequels did that, the whole thing with Anakin's training, we were just told of that, never shown it, so I get that it's better to see it, but that was never really a problem for me, but I guess I can sort of see where you're coming from with that it would have been better if it had been more of an established character maybe from the start.
And he steals Han's clothes at the end of the film.
Yes!
And his Millennium Falcon. And his co-pilot.
Yeah, the Family Guy Star Wars special was the first thing that pointed that out for me, and then ever since then it's just completely ruined that end scene for me because I can't unsee it now. But I guess we could can we talk about what it did for cinema? I mean, it definitely pushed the envelope more than what the original one was. Just incredible. No one had seen anything like it, and then this one just sort of upped the ante with the action.
I reckon it upped the story as well.
Yeah, there's the way I'd see it, the original did a lot for cinema in terms of technicality, inventiveness, potential, whereas The Empire Strikes Back has changed sort of storytelling itself in the sense that people will do a darker sequel, they'll try and take the characters to different places, and there's the twist, probably the biggest twist ever in a film. Everyone knows this twist that hasn't seen Star Wars, and that's the calibre of it. But could you imagine being there in 1918? I'll always remember the Simpsons clip where Homer walks out the cinema and spoils it for everyone, and they're all fuming. But it's true that, like, who would have thought that Darth Vader's Luke's dad? But I just think that was a groundbreaking moment, and it only took me like 15 years to clock on that Toy Story 2 actually parodied that.
That's amazing scene, Toy Story 2. I love that scene.
Brilliant parody.
But with the twist, it was sort of ruined for me, not just because I saw Phantom Menace and that's the whole history of Darth Vader, but I remember specifically having, I think I referred to this before, the whole stamps, you get like little figures on a stamp pad, and it was original trilogy ones. I think you got Vader, Luke, C-3PO, and I think it was Chewie. And I remember picking up Vader, I remember this specifically, and sort of looking at it, because I hadn't seen him in a movie yet. The Phantom Menace was the only one I'd seen, and I was saying to my dad, like, who's this character? And he says, oh, that's Darth Vader. And I was like, well, who's he? And he says, well, you know Anakin? Yeah, he says, that's him, that's Luke's dad. I was like, oh, okay, so growing up, I always knew the twist before I saw the movie, which really sucks, because if you go on YouTube and look at, like, the twist reactions to it from Empire Strikes Back, they are amazing to watch. And even watching the scene now, it still does get that smile because it is so well done. And I think, wasn't the original read of the line that Obi-Wan killed Luke's dad? I think that only a few people knew of what the real line was, didn't they?
What Lucas did, and I want a lot of credit for this because it would actually work in today's era as well. Everyone on set, including Dave Prowse, who was the guy that played Darth Vader and would say his lines, he had a big fallout with George Lucas, but that's for a different story. On set, everyone said, okay, we're going to say Obi-Wan killed your father, blah, 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 blah. Then when they were filming, on the morning, George Lucas pulls aside Mark Hamill, says, he's going to say Darth Vader's, blah, blah, I'm your father. and that's why Mark Hamill's reaction, because he's almost literally gone in. He's about to shoot. Lucas has told him that it's almost his legit reaction to it. And there's rumours that they tried to get the smallest set they could have. Only the people in the room knew about it. 3 or 4 of them. James Earl Jones obviously knew. Dave Prowse didn't know, which is why he fell out with George Lucas to a degree. There's a lot more behind the scenes stuff on that. But I think it's on probably the best well-regarded secrets in cinema, because George Lucas clearly didn't tell anyone except the director and 2 key cast members.
Mm.
Yeah, and that shows. I mean, people were shocked when it came out instead of it being spoiled, like a lot of things nowadays. I mean, Terminator Genesis is the perfect example for this year. We all knew what the twist was in the first 30 seconds of the trailer.
Yeah.
And that's a horrible feeling to have. And I called that film was going to bomb, even though people was like, "Oh no, it might be good." It was gonna bomb.
We had a fun build-up to that. It was a good time. It was a horrible film. And I actually stopped someone at work buying it. One of my friends went to buy it, and I explained to him why he shouldn't, and he didn't listen to me. And Ollie, you've wasted £20.
Yeah, I'm still trying to blank Terminator Genesis out of my mind, to be honest, but probably going to get another 2. But with this twist, we'll move on after this, but I think that twist alone, if you're going to go in for anything else, is one of the reasons you should always watch the original trilogy first before going to the prequels if you do move to that. I get that some people just look at the numbers and think, well, why am I starting with number 4 when I could be starting with number 1? But I do think you lose a lot of it if you don't watch the original trilogy first. That should always be everyone's go-to for your introduction into the Star Wars universe. So I guess we could sort of just move into positives and negatives, really. Just any key scenes that we can bring up. I know we should probably at some point talk about the confrontation between Luke and Vader, because that is a major thing. But any other scenes that you guys want to sort of bring to the discussion?
Battle of Hoth.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Yes, it's still incredible. You talked about the AT-AT, or AT-AT, sorry. They are so iconic to Star Wars, and it's that scene where the guy's looking out at the snow with the binoculars, and it just sort of pans up from the foot to the top, and it's like that moment in, Return of the King probably based it off this, where King Theoden sees the Oliphants just charging, and it's that look on his face, very similar to that. In fact, I even think that the AT-ATs were modelled off elephants, weren't they, in terms of their movements? Sort of the stop motion guys were looking at how they were going to get these things to move. And the behind the scenes of how they actually did, they were using miniatures and bigatures and just slowly moving them 1 frame at a time for stop motion, and it still looks great. They feel huge constructions. They feel like they're there, and it's just an incredible action sequence to watch.
Yeah, it is on my bucket list. There is a website that has the coordinates, because obviously it's just in a gigantic random area, and apparently it's a bit of a tourist spot, so that's something I always want to do. I think it's in Norway, but it's such a great battle, and it's everything from the snow speeder with the tow cable going round to Luke sort of throwing the grenades in. I just loved everything about it, and the build up to it as well. They know that the Emperor's coming. The Emperor. The Empire. Sorry, wrong ones. And it's just brilliant. And growing up, I didn't really clock on to Zelda. That's the sort of first victory of the Empire striking back. You know, that's their base, and they've just massacred it. And it's just cool to see. But going off, maybe one of my favourite scenes / musical pieces of the whole saga is the "I love you, I know" moment, and then there is the John Williams soundtrack, which is my favourite probably song of the entire soundtrack box that I've got. And then he's lowered in, she's crying, Chewie's roaring. Then as he comes out, you've just got it's not really the Boba Fett theme, but it kind of is, of the big drums in the background, and it is an absolutely fantastic moment, and it's probably my favourite scene of the film.
With John Williams as well, we need to talk about that this was the first movie that brought in the Imperial March as well. Again, if you're going to have like your top 2 songs that are so akin to Star Wars, you're probably going to have Binary Sunset, and Imperial March will be right alongside it.
Yeah.
Great villain. I'd say it's the best villain theme ever. Every time it comes on, you get that smirk because it immediately takes you back to Vader. And if you listen to it on an iPod while you're walking, you feel like a complete badass at the same time.
Yeah, I've done that many times to work.
Yeah, but bringing up the whole "I love you, I know" moment, we should probably talk about this because this is a huge theme that runs through the film. Romance between Han and Leia, and this is romance done right. They have great banter. Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher working off each other beautifully in this movie. And it's a believable love story, and then it's such a shame you get to Attack of the Clones, and we talked about the love story in that and how not ham-fisted that was handled. But in here, these are two characters that we got to know in the first movie, and they start off, you got that witty banter between the two. Leia's sort of apprehensive, and Harrison Ford just plays the rogue so well, and then...
Can we quickly just take a moment just to bow our heads in silence to Luke being put in the friend zone by his own sister?
He thought he had a chance still. He puts his arm around her.
Do you know what's really creepy? It's that scene where she kisses him and walks out, and he does that whole like Chewie pose where he slicks his hair back and he looks so smug. Really creepy when you get to Return of the Jedi.
Like,
and
yeah.
The reason the romance works so well is because it's the subplot of it's a subplot of the film. It's not the plot. The interview I saw with George Lucas from '99 was an Empire magazine. He says to them, "This is just as it's come out in England. Oh, some blah blah blah. Some people didn't like Episode 1. Episode 2 is going to be the romance film. Episode 3 is going to be the darker one. I don't think a lot of people will like the darker one because it's darker." Something like that. And I was actually shocked because it's so interesting to read it from '99, and clearly the darker one was the most successful of your prequel trilogy. The darkest one is the most successful of your saga. And again, Episode 2, the fact he said it's a romance film was its first mistake, whereas in this, you wouldn't have gone in thinking there'd be a romance element to it. It just worked in the background of everything that's happening, just that, and I think it's brilliant because it's the little 3-4 minute bits. Again, soundtrack by John Williams helps, especially in the Millennium Falcon scene when they get it on with the wires. And C-3PO ruins it because I despise that character.
Straight up cut blocking in that moment.
But it's great, and the I know it's improv. I think there was talk they did like 50 odd takes or something, but it's just brilliant. It's the most like Han Solo term he'll ever have, and I know it's the main one, but it's just the fact that you've told someone that's about to die that you love them, and he just says I know. It's so right, and then he drops in, and even the credit is they could have had him do some striking pose of him in carbonite, but it's him terrified, and I think makes it 10 times darker, especially going into Jabba's palace. If it had just been standing there like trying to be heroic, you can't because he's in so much pain, and it just works.
I think the original scripted line for that scene was I love you too, and no one was like happy with that line. I think Harrison Ford said like this line's crap, we've got to try something. And I think, as he said, like they were about to go to lunch and they said, look, we just got to go for it, one more take, we'll use whatever we get, just go for it. And that was the one that ended up in the movie, which was awesome. I was going to say something else about that scene and I can't remember. Never mind. Moving on. Let's briefly talk about the end lightsaber fight with Luke and Vader, and then we'll sort of round up after that.
I have to say, I'm not going to lie, like, I've seen things on the internet talking about this final lightsaber fight. Very recently on r/Star Wars, somebody posted up a thing with a meme kind of thing, with a gif of all of, like, the fight scene, and at the top bar it said Jedi-like reflexes, and it just showed pictures and pictures of Luke getting hit over and over with very un-Jedi-like reflexes, showing that in this fight he really is kind of way out of his depth, and he hasn't trained up.
And I think that's why it works, because Yoda's warning him, you can't convert Vader, and it's just the amateur in him saying I have to. Again, the prequels fail, just that they try and have Anakin do that in some degrees, but it doesn't work. I just love, and I've always loved, is when the music kicks in with Vader. He just stands there, puts it down. Luke blocks 1, blocks 2. Then he gets smacked the first time. Vader doesn't give a shit. He carries on breathing in the same posture. He's just throwing shit at him, and then he just eventually gets the window.
Well, at that point, Vader is not trying to kill him.
No.
Luke is obviously trying to kill Vader. That Vader
exactly,
is
and I think that's the way it works, and it builds up for the final fight to see that Luke is ready. And I just love that Vader's toying with him. He could have easily done something else. Arguably, one of my friends said the biggest mistake in cinema history is the fact that Darth Vader could have easily caught Luke with the Force as he fell off at the end. I don't know if that would change your opinions, but that would have been a very interesting finale.
Yeah. I think he did that as well, didn't they? How it should have ended in their Empire Strikes Back one, they sort of do that scene as well. But yeah, I love the whole cat and mouse nature of this entire fight. Like, even as soon as the lightsabers ignite, Vader could literally just force choke Luke. And I know now, sort of the old EU's been swept under the rug, and we've got the new ones in. And in the comics, unfortunately, because I love the fact that in Empire, when you watch this is sort of the first time Luke and Vader have ever crossed lightsabers before. But now with the comics come out, they've sort of had a brief little fight before this one. This is their second fight.
They canon though?
Yeah, and I believe it's sort of around. Doesn't Vader already? Yeah, he already knows, doesn't he, that Luke's his son?
Not
because
in that
Boba
one.
Fett's told him at this point.
Not in that one. It was a shame of the comics because it was the brand new one, Star Wars issue 1. There's this great moment when it finishes with them facing. They just face each other, and then basically in the next issue they have literally, like, I think it might only be like a panel or a page where they clash and Vader basically clocks on that it's his lightsaber, which where it sets the search. And it's a shame they cross, because I know that you sense in the sense that the canon says it's the sort of second one, but I still feel strongly I do like the new canon comics, and they're kind of a good backup. But to me, the primarily canon will always be the films. I know that I know that Darth was alive in the Clone Wars, but to me, he's dead in Episode 1, and I just like the sort of extra dimension, the fact it is an expanded universe. But you're right, it doesn't work to the favour. Where I love the fact it's their first meeting, and to me, it's still their first meeting because Luke isn't ready at all.
And I think Luke did pretty well, considering Yoda never even taught him how to use a lightsaber. Like, we guess that he's been training a little bit, and I think that, wasn't it Heir to the Jedi or something came out? There was sort of a new canon book that came out that I think set in between A New Hope and Empire, which sort of shows Luke training a little bit more. But yeah, that whole fight, the bit you were talking about where Vader's just force throwing stuff at him, and the bit where the window breaks is great as well, and Vader's cape's billowing. Just that entire scene's fantastic. The way it's lit, and they tried to replicate that with the Dooku fight at the end of Episode 2, and it didn't really work. But yeah, so I guess just positives and negatives. Can you guys think of any problems with how with it? George, I know you said before we hit record that when you initially watched this, your perceptions of it have changed, but you thought this was boring, or you didn't really care for this one as much?
It wasn't boring growing up. It just wasn't as exciting as 5 and... No, sorry, it wasn't exciting as 6 and
4.
Phantom Menace to a degree. As a 3-4-year-old, I think I always liked it. It's just I wouldn't rush to put it on first. I'd watch it if I did the trilogy. And like Episode 4 had the X-Wings, but with this it was always the Battle of Hoth. I loved it growing up, and I did like the duel at the end, but as a kid I was a bit bored of the Yoda stuff. However, as I grew older, I like this a lot more. Then as I get into film, I clock on, this is really good. Then I start to catch on, hold on, this is seriously fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
And I know it got voted Empire's greatest film in history. I did vote for it. I'm very biased. But it's got every right to be considered as part of these votes. I mean, I haven't seen Godfather Part 2. I've seen the first one, so I can't really comment on that. But
yeah,
it annoys me when you can have great films of all time and there are people that will put their middle finger up to blockbusters saying no, because it's got a budget that has more than 6 zeros, it's not allowed to be here. And then, like, if it's a good film, it's a good film. This is one of the better films. It is just a coincidence that it's part of the most popular franchise in history, and I love it. And especially the more I hear about it, the more I think about it, this is so clearly the best Star Wars film, and I'm just so grateful that they actually went and made it dark.
I have to say though, like, this is the first bitter ending to a kids film I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
Like, I do call it a kids film. I don't really mean it as a kids film because it's enjoyed by all ages, but
family film, yeah.
As like a family film, yeah. Because I'd seen films like The Iron Giant before, which is a bittersweet ending.
Oh, I love The Iron Giant.
Like, it has a bittersweet moment towards the end. This one was just bitter. There was nothing going right for them in the end other than the fact that they all lived through it. And that teaches you some good life lessons, but it's a bit dark for a kids' film. And that was the thing that
what
took
I
me
do
away
want to
from
say,
it.
my only negative, it's more or less like a nitpick. It's cool, but I never really clocked on that if you're going to park a Millennium Falcon on top of a bridge that the Imperial own, they're going to see it, someone's going to walk past a window and it's, hey, why is my window covered by something? it would still show up on the sky. I never really got that. It's cool though. It's cool to see it floating away. I like the special edition change of Bob the Slave one being put in, but I never really, you know, it looks cool, but it doesn't really work. If the Empire would find you and they would kill you.
Yeah, see, that scene's never bothered me before, but yeah, I
But
completely get that.
it's a nitpick. It's something I still like.
It is,
I
yeah.
still like the scene. I think it's cool, but it's just something that wouldn't happen.
It's like me with the snakes and the lizards on
Yeah.
Dagobah. Like, probably no one's ever thought of that. But I'm really trying to think of some negatives now, and I don't think
It's
I can.
not.
You know.
If you can't have any,
It's-
don't say any.
Yeah, no, I don't think I can. I know that, wasn't it Joss Whedon when he was talking about making Avengers 2, he was talking about Empire Strikes Back, and now he's always hated the ending because it is a come back next time type ending. But as you two said at the start, like, it is a middle chapter in a series, and as an episodic series like Star Wars is, you're kind of going to get that, really. Doesn't really bother me. I think that the film is, without question of doubt, one of the best films ever made. Certainly one of the best sequels ever made. Brilliantly directed by Irving Kershner. Fantastic story. Love where it takes the characters and the fact that it goes darker. So many iconic scenes from this one. As I said before, I just prefer watching Jedi, just to sort of like, if I'm going to watch a Star Wars film, Return of the Jedi will always be the one I just throw in, sit back and watch. But watching Empire again, it still holds up today. We never even talked about the fantastic asteroid sequence as well. Like, how they did the effects on that in 1980 just baffles me, but it looks fantastic. And I can see why it is many people's favourite Star Wars film. I think it definitely is the better made one of all of them, and I don't think that this one is going to be easily topped. And this has sort of set the stage for all the structure of trilogies now, and I'm sure we're going to see that as well with this new trilogy that's coming out when we get to Episode 8. I'm sure that's going to be the darkest one, and it will sort of be following the same sort of plot points that this one did. And yeah, I can't praise this film enough. If you haven't seen it, watch it. But I mean, who hasn't seen Star Wars at this point? Empire Strikes Back, without question or doubt, one of the best films ever made. So yeah, that was our review of Empire Strikes Back. Be sure to rate, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think of it. Let us know what some of your other favourite ones are in the trilogy, or any other Star Wars stories you want to share with us. You can find us at Facebook at facebook.com/cinemasavvy. We're on Twitter at cinema_savvy, and on letterboxd.com at /cinema_savvy as well. So get involved. We are almost coming to the end of our Star Wars month, I guess, sort of just before the big push before Force Awakens comes out. We'll have our Return of the Jedi review, which will sort of cap off the entire 6-film saga. And then if we can get it out, we'll also try and get a top 10 moments one, because I know that that'll be an interesting one. I think we'll have quite a lot of different ones in that list. So yeah, be sure to look out for that. More reactions coming up as well on the channel, so just stay tuned and get involved. So until next time, thanks for listening.